see you all. The bad news is that I was asked to prepare about 15-20 minutes, so I did. The good news is a lot of it's been said already, so I probably won't have to keep you that long. The problem with being last on the bill like this after two extremely competent, able and good speakers is that most of what I'd like to say is probably been said already. This isn't a problem that I often face in the European Parliament. Unless, of course, I'm coming on after one of my colleagues. And I normally only get a minute to speak. 60 seconds is the norm. So once I get an audience in front of me, you're probably going to have to cut my microphone off. Which did happen to me last week, actually, with 60 seconds, but never mind. Now, the subject this evening is immigration, can we control it? And the short answer to that is yes, of course we can. But we have to have a government with the commitment and the political will and the courage to take the necessary actions. Now, in 2010, I wrote a booklet entitled Immigration, Action Overdue. Now, the figures in it are obviously now way out of date, but I think that the conclusions that I came to are still valid, and the policies I suggested are also still valid, more valid than ever. But by the time I actually get around to updating it, which is something I want to do, I think the title will have to change to Immigration Action Long Overdue. But before considering what we should do and could be done, I'd like to discuss the issue itself. At some point in the last 30 years or so, it became the dogma of our political and media classes that unrestrained, mass, uncontrolled immigration was unquestionably beneficial. And anyone who questioned it was likely to be labelled a racist, an xenophobe, and ostracised from mainstream political life. And that's indeed if they didn't get a visit from the police as well. Now, under the Labour government of 1997 to 2010, uncontrolled mass immigration was a deliberate policy of social engineering. Please don't think that it happened by accident. And it was meant to bring about the most profound demographic changes this country has ever seen. And this was done in order to create what they describe as a multicultural and diverse society. And we know this from the horse's mouth because of the revelations of Andrew Nether, a Labour Party advisor and speechwriter for Tony Blair, and other senior government figures. And Mr Nether revealed in 2009 that the government's policy was to make Britain more multicultural for political reasons, and opponents were to be branded as racist in order to deter them from criticism. Now, Mr Nether said, quote, "I remember coming away from some meetings with a clear sense that the policy was intended to rub the right's nose in diversity and render their arguments out of date," unquote. The policy of the Labour government was to transform the makeup of the British population for ideological and political reasons, and the figures from the census of 2011 demonstrate just how successful they were. Now, the proponents of mass immigration love to tell us that Britain has always been a nation of migrants. And we've already heard that from Sir Andrew, and it simply isn't true. From the 879 years from 1066 to 1945, there was in fact comparatively moderate rates of immigration into Britain. Now, there was always a flow of craftsmen and merchants from the continent in medieval and Renaissance times, and then of course in the 17th century we had the Huguenots who came in their thousands, and in the 19th century we had the Irish and the Jews who came in tens of thousands. Now, the point about these waves of immigration, I think, was that they consisted of relatively moderate amounts of people as a percentage of the host population. And these people, of course, were quickly absorbed into the host community because they already identified with it for religious and cultural reasons. Now, likewise, in the first half of the 20th century, the total number of various migrants and refugees from communist and Nazi tyrannies probably amounted to less than 3 to 5 months of our annual net immigration figures now. And the rate of immigration, of course, changed dramatically in the 1950s and 60s when immigration was encouraged for economic reasons. Now, from the 1970s to the 1990s, I'd slightly disagree with Sir Andrew because I think the numbers were significant in themselves, but they actually paled into insignificance with the figures of the last 16 years. Now, There was a great flood of migration in 2004 when 10 new countries joined the EU, and 7 of those, of course, were for Eastern Europe. The government told us that there would be about 13,000 arrivals, and of course it was in the hundreds of thousands. And if I read the last draft there that Sir Andrew put up, the total figure is now edging towards 1 million from those countries. Now, one of the questions, one of the main questions, I think, for questioning the benefits of unrestrained immigration is about population growth. And in 1997, the population was about 58 million. Looking at the graphs before I came out, by 2011, the population had risen to 63.2 million. And I think most of that population growth of 5.2 can be put down to immigration or birth to migrants. And of course, as already been said, on the current trends, it's set to skyrocket. By about 2020, I believe it's going to be 70 million, and by 2035, about 73 million, edging up to 75. And by the middle of the century, it will be close to 80 million people and spiral ever upwards. One of the things that astonished me when I came in 2004-05, I got a student to actually do a graph for me, a spreadsheet of world population figures as a percentage of square mileage to see who had the most population density. And it astounded me to see that Britain actually came quite high in the rankings. And when you take England out, where most of the people live in the UK, it was very high. We are one of the most densely populated countries in the world after, surprisingly, India, China and Japan. So it doesn't really make any sense to wonder why we have to keep importing more people into our country. We're not a vast open territory like the United States in the 19th century that needed mass immigration in order to develop its natural resources. We're a post-industrial society that actually is scrabbling to find work for our own unemployed without the need to import vast numbers of people, and very often low-skilled people. Now, everyday life tells us, that immigration is putting ever-increasing strains on our housing stock, on our infrastructure and public services. We've seen the demand and supply for housing go up so much that even our own children, when they have good-paying jobs, simply cannot afford somewhere to live, neither to rent nor to buy. Now, as Sir Andrew has said, in order just to house the immigrants that we're bringing in, we need to build the equivalent of a new city the size of Birmingham every 4 to 5 years. Now, I won't waste my time or insult your intelligence by going over and repeating the arguments that are normally presented for the benefits of immigration. Now, one of the most laughable of these, of course, which I will mention, is that we would need ever-increasing waves of younger migrants in order to support an ageing population. Well, thank you very much for laughing. This forgets, of course, that migrants themselves age, and you need yet more waves of migrants in order to support those ageing population, ad infinitum. Now, ageing populations, of course, are common to all countries that actually improve their living standards and raise their health care. Now, mass immigration is no solution, and the numbers are simply unsustainable. Now, the reasons for mass immigration, in my view, have been exploitative on one hand and ideological on the other. It's one of the curious examples in modern politics, the EU being another one, of how big business and Marxist ideology have found a common cause. The capitalists get cheap labour, and the Marxists get to transform society. And both are happy, at least in the short term. Now, the 2011 census demonstrate the level of this transformation that we've seen. Now, in London, less than 45% of the population now describe themselves as white British. I think it's fair to say that London is now an international city that just happens to be in England. Let me say that moderate rates of immigration, where migrants assimilate and intermarry with the existing population over a period of time, would not create a problem. But a policy of deliberately creating separate and distinct communities in a short period of time may not prove to be in everyone's best interests in the longer term. Now, I personally, and the UK Independence Party, are not opposed to immigration as such, But the level of immigration should be based on what is beneficial for Britain, both in economic and social terms. And that's obviously not been the case for the last 50 years. Now, we do not have a problem with migrants who come to Britain to work, pay taxes, obey the law. But that should happen in numbers that are controlled and decided by our own government on criteria that benefits Britain. And people who settle here permanently and seek British citizenship should be expected to want to assimilate into British society. They should accept one language, English, for all public use, accept one legal system, the English common law and statute law, and one democratic political system and its institutions. Private multiculturalism is good, state multiculturalism is bad. We can all enjoy and participate in the private expression of people's different cultural customs and practices, but state multiculturalism with different laws for different people is a recipe for division and conflict in the future. Now, the British government and Parliament no longer have control of immigration policy, certainly not from the EU. We have surrendered power to the European Union, and we must have open borders with every other European country. And as has been said, and everybody knows it, in 2014, there was final restrictions to move, and 29 million Romanian and Bulgarians will be given automatic right of entry to the UK. But what you may not know is that in the European Parliament last week, we voted on 5 reports, progress reports, on countries that are either about to join or are seeking entry to the EU. And these countries were Croatia, which joins in January next year, I believe, Turkey, Montenegro, Serbia and Kosovo. Now, these countries have combined populations of about 88 million. Now, should those countries join eventually, then of course they will all have an automatic right to entry to the UK. And please don't anybody tell me that nobody wants Turkey to join, because you don't sit in the European Parliament and listen to the debates. And what you should also know is that the MEPs from the Conservative, Labour, Liberal Democrat and Green parties all voted in favour of these reports, of those countries joining the EU and their populations being given right of entry to Britain. Only UKIP MEPs opposed it. And if you look on YouTube, you'll see our speeches in those debates. I won't name it because it wouldn't be fair, but I said to one Conservative MEP, so you're in favour of Turkey joining the EU then, and all of these people being given right of entry? He said, oh no, he said, I'm opposed to that, but I'm voting in favour of this report. Now, if you could work that one out, then please tell me what it means. Now, the current political establishment has no intention whatsoever of controlling immigration. Anything they say to that effect are lies designed to combat the electoral threat from my party, the UK Independence Party. At least it shows we're having an effect. Now, the question tonight is, can we control immigration? Well, the answer to that is not this side of a democratic political revolution. The political establishment has created a problem that is not meant to have a solution. It will be tremendously difficult to solve it, but it can be done. Now, first of all, we need a government with the courage, will and determination to tackle the problem. And the first thing that that government must do is to leave the European Union. That way we can regain control of immigration policy and indeed our national destiny. Now, the government, if I just may elaborate on a few policies, I'll be as quick as I can, but the government should declare a commitment, a public commitment to end the age of mass, uncontrolled immigration, and declare a policy of limited immigration where it is or for the benefit of Britain, and it's mutually beneficial not just to the immigrants, but to Britain. And there are a number of things that we have to do before we can do that. First of all, we have to establish effective border controls so that we know the identity of foreign nationals when they enter and when they leave. Overstaying a visa should be a criminal offence, and anyone that's caught should then be refused entry for 10 years. Now, no foreign visitor should be allowed to enter Britain unless they've got private health insurance or we enjoy a reciprocal arrangement with their countries, which can work. Now, illegal immigrants should... Now, we've got at least 1 million illegal immigrants in my view. And I've met some of them, so I know there's a lot more than the actual figures. Now, illegal immigrants should be required to register their presence. Now, if they don't do that, and they're later discovered, then they should face automatic deportation. Now, having registered, they should realise that they are going to be sent back to their own countries in an orderly fashion. Now, I think there are some circumstances where we may consider people for work permits, but only in very extenuating circumstances. But we have to have the freedom to do that. Now, we don't, of course, want to prevent people coming to work in Britain where it's mutually beneficial. And my party's policy is that we should introduce a work permit system for specific jobs for limited periods of time, year, or maybe 6 months, year, 2 years, 3 years. If that job cannot eventually be filled by a person, by a British citizen, then the migrant could apply for permanent residence and eventually, possibly, even citizenship. Now, migrants should not be eligible for benefits or housing until they pay tax for at least 5 years. And I think that special consideration should be given to British citizens wishing to marry foreign spouses, because I have people writing to me on this subject. We have no control whatsoever of criminals coming to our country from EU countries, but we deny entry to perfectly respectable spouses of British citizens who come from non-EU countries. Now, of course, Britain also has to withdraw from the European Convention on Human Rights.
Yes.
We have to repeal the Human Rights Act and remove ourselves from the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice and the European Court of Human Rights. We had perfectly good human rights in this country under the common law before we subjugated ourselves to foreign courts, and we can have so again. Plus, we would actually be able to deport foreign criminals and terrorist suspects. Now, I'm coming to the end now, I'm sure to your great relief. But we all know migrants who come to this country have worked hard, obeyed the law, and become valued members of our society. No one has a problem with such people. And it's often the people who migrated to Britain in previous decades that are the most openly vociferous, openly critical and vociferous of the current immigration policy of the last decade or more. Now, mass uncontrolled immigration has been a disaster for Britain. Selective immigration, in relatively small numbers, can be beneficial to all concerned. But what I can absolutely guarantee you is if the British people go on voting for the Lib Lab Con, then absolutely nothing is going to change.